Hi everyone, it's Emily, and I'm here to discuss Embodying Integration, Chapter 1, Part 1. And I would say that this chapter, or the beginning of this chapter, focuses on lament. I mean, it's not really a shocker because it's the title of the discussion board, but I just actually really like this concept, and I especially like how the author introduced this concept by sharing her personal experiences with grief in the form of a miscarriage. Even though, I've never experienced a miscarriage, it was nice to be able to relate to her experience in terms of grief, which is something I've been experiencing throughout my life. And it's basically just a natural process. And it seems that grief is a big factor for a lament, and that's a common theme that I've obtained from the reading. Next is the definition of lament. So lament involves suffering, crying out, expressing resistance for the way things are, and ultimately acting to make things better. I find this definition very interesting because it shows the reality of lament. It's suffering, crying out, blaming God in a way, because we're why is this happening to us, and just having resistance from sharing our deepest sorrows with other people and just kind of distancing ourselves. But ultimately we can't live in that bubble forever, and we need to act to make things better for ourselves and our lives to grow as individuals. And for psychotherapy, the therapist focuses on the individual and collective lament in the terms of an individual's pain in a broken world. And I feel this is also really important because of grief. Unfortunately, grief is like I said, it's a natural process, and it's inevitable, and it's unavoidable, and it leads to heartbreak, and that is a form of pain. And it's really important to focus on that pain and adjusting and growing from that pain in a broken world, because it could happen again and again and again. But it's just that it's a natural process, and we need to grow from it. Mark also discusses, or the other author of the book discusses, the second and third wave approaches in CBT and how that can establish room for lament. I'm not going to go in too deep of a detail with this, but the second wave approach is empathizing with the client or an individual on their experiences, while the third wave is kind of acknowledging that suffering is a part of life. And I feel this is just really relatable for me, because I'm kind of both of those approaches, where I have a tendency of empathizing with people when it comes to grief, and I have a personal value. I don't know if that's the right word, where I'm suffering is a part of life, and there's really nothing you can do to avoid it. And it's just natural. I keep saying that, but it's true. The authors also use the story of Jeremiah to exemplify how to faithfully protest and wrestle with God so that he can foster resilience in his own struggles and faith. And this is a very important concept that I will get onto later and further explain. And then also on page 43, I think, is just kind of exemplifies the difficulties of being able to confront God. So it's kind of contrasting Jeremiah's story, and the author discusses about their client Leanne, who was terrified of putting frustration towards God of things happening because she didn't want to ruin her relationship with him. And I just find that really relatable, where we have a tendency to blame God, but we also don't want to hurt God's feelings, even though God is this almighty being, and he knows our character in a way. But yeah. And then hope needs to be considered as a possibility when creating spaces for lament. I really like the incorporation with hope and lament, and how they both bring meaning to each other and are simultaneous realities of human existence. You can't have one without the other. So that is done with the key messages. My favorite point or quote is on page 39. Let me just get onto it. And it's basically a summary of Jeremiah's story. And it's primarily, Jeremiah can serve as an exemplar for those of us who are seeking faith, and we can often feel like what can often feel like a suffering and senseless world. So this just basically says how even though Jeremiah thought that like God was deceiving him, he still had faith in him regardless, and was constantly seeking faith in him. Despite these struggles, I feel like it's so, in our generation, we tend to distance ourselves away from God, but this highlights like the importance of seeking him in the most difficult times, because he does provide clarity with our most difficult experiences that we face. And especially since we live in this broken world, it is so common for us to experience suffering and experience grief, and we kind of have to adapt to this lifestyle in a way, which is unfortunate but necessary to do. And it's important to make things better, like the author emphasized early on in this chapter. Did I agree with the author's perspective? I would say yes. I basically agreed with everything because it was so relatable to in a certain way that I can't even describe it. Like, I've already said the word relatable so many times in this video because there was just nothing I really disagreed with. Like, I just feel like grief was a very commonality thing that I was able to relate to with the author, and like grief leads to suffering, and being able to find that suffering is very difficult, or not find the clarity from suffering is very difficult. But yeah, like, it's really important just to continue to have faith in God and just reach out to him in these most difficult times. When we're experiencing heartbreak, because heartbreak is unpreventable, and yeah, I there's really nothing I disagreed with, which is just crazy. But anyways, how does this information relate to your own experiences or beliefs? Well, obviously I've already said how much this related to me involving grief, but I feel like this quote on page 45 is just so perfectly said. It says, "Holding lament and hope together is the substance of living deeply. In knowing the loss of grief for friends, family who have died, we hold on to their memories with a bit more gratitude, joy, and thankfulness. In knowing the deep joys of love that have fallen, the loss is all the greater. Pain is ever present with delight, and hope runs through them both." I feel like this quote perfectly exemplifies like the aftermath of being able to heal from suffering. And the author kind of emphasizes this by having lament and hope. Like, with lament, you kind of have a feeling of hopelessness. That's why they're kind of contradictory to one another, but they're so necessary to build off one another to grow as a human being. And then, yeah, I like looking back on my personal experiences with grief, I find way more content with the situations that just way more content with what happened. Obviously, like right after a person that I love died, or experienced like things of like aspects of pain throughout my life, it was very difficult moving on, and I tended to have a lot of regrets of things that have happened involving death. And now that I've grown through that, I definitely have more gratitude and thankfulness for the memories that I've had with those people, and it just allowed me to kind of grow as a human being and learn so much from those experiences, which I'm extremely thankful for. And then finally, my question for the discussion was like, I feel like there was an emphasis on mainly people who were very open with sharing their difficulties in life. I tend to be one of those people that I'm very open about my feelings. So my question is, for those who find it difficult to openly express their deepest sorrows, what is the best tactic to find lament and hope? It seems like from psychotherapy like perspective, it's like talking to a psychotherapist and how to incorporate lament and hope into your lives, because they're bring meaning on one another. But like, I feel like for those that it is more difficult to unlock those deep sorrows, like what is the best tactic to do that, if that makes sense. I'm really excited to talk about this reading tomorrow more in class, and I can't wait to listen to everyone's thoughts about it. Have a good night, y'all.